I'd love to have dinner with George Washington because although he was such a crucial figure in the history of our country, we don't know all that much about him because a lot of his papers did not survive. He was a very private person. Now you'd think it would be Abraham Lincoln, but one thing good about Lincoln is that almost everyone who met him, it seems, after a certain age, wrote a book or gave an interview to someone. So his life is pretty documented, but Washington remains a mystery. I wanted to be a historian, believe it or not, from about the age of 10, which sounds a little bit grim, but what that was I grew up in Illinois, and it was the time of the Civil War centennial, and that was a big deal. And I got interested in Lincoln. I went to the Lincoln House in Springfield, Illinois, when I was about 8 years old, I think. And true story, the guide was there and said, "This is the chair that Lincoln sat in when he read to his children." And I said to him, "Well, when Lincoln's boys misbehaved, did he spank them?" And the guide said, "No, can you believe he didn't believe in discipline? He let those brats run wild through this house." And so Lincoln looked pretty good to me after hearing that. So I started reading a lot about Lincoln and other presidents and really wanted to write history books about presidents from a very early age. James McGregor Burns. The book he's best known for is a big book called Leadership. And the idea of it is that there are things, let's say, in presidential leadership that can tell you how to be a good editor of a newspaper, or a good head of your company, or a good principal of a school. And that seems sort of obvious now, but it wasn't obvious when he wrote that book about 40 years ago. And that book led to there being a lot of leadership studies programs and an awful lot of schools and colleges and universities. So he was my teacher at Williams College, and I studied under him almost like an apprentice. So, I often say if it were not for him, I would be doing something totally different, and I would not be enjoying it the way I do. One of the most surprising things to me is that we think that we know a lot about presidents at the time they serve, and we really don't, because you need to wait 30 or 40 years to get into their letters, if they write letters anymore, or emails, or records of their private conversations. And presidents 30 or 40 years later look like totally different people from the ones that we think we know in real time. One thing you might be surprised by is that I do not read anywhere near enough fiction, and in my next life, that's what I intend to correct. And the reason for that is that in my line of work, writing history books about presidents, I have to read so much in the course of what I'm doing to learn about these guys that I almost don't have the attention span to read fiction. And it's a shame, because when I'm reading history, I enjoy it, but I'm always trying to figure out what is the author trying to do, what are we being told that's new, and that's not entirely enjoyable and relaxing, whereas, fiction really would be. So I think you're inspiring me to get into fiction more than I have been. Well, the book I just published was a book called Presidents of War. It took 10 years to write and research. Haven't had that happen before, will not have that happen again. And much of the reason it took so long was that this is a book that covers war presidents from almost the beginning to almost recent times, about 200 years. And I thought that, if I'm doing, let's say, 30, 40,000 words on one president, I wouldn't have to research it in the same way that I would if I were writing, let's say, a biography of James Madison or Abraham Lincoln. And I was wrong, because what I realized was, if you're going to do this right, you have to read pretty much everything, because there might be some book that tells you something that's going to, completely contradict a lot of what you've written. So the result was that I was doing research all the way through, took a very long time. And in retrospect, I'm surprised that I misjudged it so much, because it seems sort of obvious that a book on that large a subject, it's a long book, 750 pages, would take that long, especially to research. writing took a little bit less. I love writing history. I love the narrative. I love the characters. I love to have a plot that makes people, move ahead in the same way that people want to when they're reading good fiction. But at the same time, I try to write history books that have some ability to illuminate problems that we Americans are living through in our own time. The book I just did, Presidents of War, it's about how presidents waged wars, some of them unnecessary, and used them to get more power. And that's something I think we should always be worried about with presidents.